John from Ripewave Audio, and for today's video we're going to take a first look at the new flagship AV receiver from Onkyo, the TX-RZ70, which will be available this spring for $2,799. Now this follows similar announcements over the last month or two from Pioneer, the VSX LX805 at $2,999, and the Integra DRX-8.4 at $3,200. Videos we do on these brands always get a lot of attention on this channel, and with that comes a wide range of feedback. Some are very anxious to jump in and say, I'm going to buy that model. I've been waiting for Onkyo or Pioneer or Integra to release the next model. But we get others who are jumping in and saying, geez, I've had the worst experience with these brands. The quality, there's been issues with production, product availability, and when I need service, the service has been very poor. So we can only hope that with new ownership, these issues are resolved. But we're going to cover this new receiver with hopes that things will be getting better, and we'll be listening to everybody's feedback to ensure that it indeed does. Now the first product that we're going to look at is the products that these are replacing, and we're talking about the TX-RZ 1100, which was introduced in 2017 for $1,599, and the TX-RZ 3100, which sold for $3,399, launched in 2016, a year prior. Now, the 1100 had 9 channels of amplification, and the 3100 had 11 channels of amplification, both at 140 watts per channel, driven into 2 channels. So it wasn't an all channels driven rating, as we don't see that with the Pioneer, Integra, and Onkyo brands. And we can see on the slide here what it looked like, and it's the classic design from Onkyo that hasn't changed much over the years, with some buttons on the front here and others hidden behind a door. And this is what we see on some models, and it gives you access to more of the buttons that would typically only be available on the remote. And we'll talk more about what's on the back of this model as we get into the comparisons with the new model that replaces it. And before we get into the new models, let's talk about how things have evolved since the old ones were introduced to market. And we'll do this one more time. And if you had seen prior videos from the Integra video we did a few weeks ago, and the more recent Pioneer video with its new flagships, you've already seen this, so you could skip ahead. But for those who haven't, Vox International owns these brands now: Onkyo, Integra, and Pioneer, as well as Klipsch and Jammo and Energy and Magnet and a few others. How did they end up owning these? If you go back to 2019, Sound United was poised to acquire Onkyo Corporation's home audio division. This was set in place and the announcements went out, but they backed off, leaving in an uncertain state of what was going to come of these home audio products and who was going to take care of them. Well, we had a little more hope with some announcements coming out in 2020 in October that 11 Trading Company was going to pick up the distribution efforts for these brands. Now, this is the same group that manages Klipsch distribution. So that gave some hope out there that things were going to keep moving along, but still a lot of uncertainty. Then we see in early of 2021 that Onkyo and Pioneer and Integra were launching new 8K capable receivers. Again, sparking new life into the company. And then we hear about another bid for the Onkyo Home Entertainment Corporation this time from Vox International, May of 2021. Now this all got completed in September of that year, and the way they executed this is with Premium Audio Company. They're a wholly owned part of Vox International, was going to carry through the transaction with Sharp Electronics handling the manufacturing of these receivers in their Malaysia facilities. And the last hole to fill in was the distribution in Europe and throughout EMEA, so Middle East and Africa as well, with Premium Audio Company holding the reins for this directly, not using a third party. And this happened in July of 2022. And what we're seeing now, these new models from Pioneer, Integra, and Onkyo, these are the first new products under the Onkyo family of brands to hit the market since Vox International and the Premium Audio Company have taken the reins. So let's see what they've done with this Onkyo model, the TX-RZ70 that comes in at $2,799 that we'll see later this spring. As we said before, this is a 13-channel unit, 11 channels of amplification like its predecessor, 140 watts per channel Class AB. And we look at the front of this, and this looks very similar. We'll see it side by side in a second here. I think most of the changes around the back, we'll see less of the component and composite connections, which is typical of all brands nowadays. In fact, many brands have got rid of composite and component connections altogether. Onkyo, Pioneer, and Integra are one of the few brands out there that are keeping some inputs alive on the back of these receivers. So if you have a few old components, you won't need a device in between to handle the conversion. Now we don't have a picture of the remote at this time, so we grabbed one from the drawing within the manual, and we'll see what it turns out to be in subsequent days. Now looking at it side by side with the Onkyo model it's slated to replace, the RZ3100. We picked the 3100 because it's a closer match than the 1100 from a price point, as well as having 11 channels of amplification at 140 watts. So that's a direct match between these generations. So let's pair those together through this whole review. We can notice that the remote that was introduced with that 2016 model was quite different than what's proposed today. So I'm not surprised that they've done some updating there, but it's not too new because it kind of matches what Pioneer and Integra launched in 2019, this drawing picture of the new remote. So not a brand new remote, but new if you're coming from the 3100. And here is both models with their doors open. And you can see that the layout and placement of the buttons and the display and everything seem to be just about the same. It almost looks like there's a little difference in the volume wheel. It's a little hard to tell from the picture, but otherwise no changes on the external front panel of these. And this carries throughout the line. I think Onkyo is paying more attention to the internals than the externals at this point. And turning around the back, this kind of reveals some of the changes that are happening internally with a whole new layout in the back. Connections, so you're down to 1 instead of 3 there. And you'll see when we get into the I/O comparison that they've dropped some of the digital inputs as well. One of the big things you notice is the spacing on the amplifier speaker terminals. These are not spaced widely as they were on the 3100. So I've got some reports that some of this community does prefer the older spacing. I can see that. It makes it a lot easier to find the right one and gives you a lot more room in behind to make it all connected. So I think I would agree with that. The bigger spacing would have been better than what they've moved to. And now here's comparing the new model flagship from Onkyo with Pioneer's flagship, the LX805. And you can see that while the button functionality may be the same, the placement is different, the use of wheels is different, so the ergonomics are different, and the cosmetics are a little different there, including right down to the LCD display, which is amber on the Pioneer version and kind of a greenish blue on the Onkyo. And if we do the same and look at the Integra, that's more of a gray blue on the LCD. And the big difference here is that the buttons are not hidden behind any door to any fashion. So Integra, no hidden door, it's all exposed. When we turn these things around and compare the Onkyo with the Pioneer, the layout looks exactly the same between the new flagships. The main difference you'll see here is the Onkyo version doesn't have any balanced inputs or outputs, as you see in the Pioneer, as well as in the Integra. So if you do want balanced inputs and outputs, Onkyo is not going to be your choice. The other thing that you'll notice with the Integra and the Pioneer is there's more watts per channel, 150 watts versus 140, but all of these are 11 channels of amplification and 13 channels of processing. Now let's look at the Onkyo family all together. And you can see that consistency in the design. As you move to the more affordable models, the units get a little smaller, and ultimately they get rid of the hidden door as you move down the line there. Now the Onkyo line has one more model in its lineup to address the $500 market, and that's the TX-NR 5100. That's 7 channels of amplification at 80 watts apiece, so it's a modest entry, and I guess at $500 that needs to be a little more reserved in what it can do as far as its capabilities. But you don't have something at that price point with Pioneer and Integra, so if you are looking at something that is closer to $500, that might be your answer, provided it handles the functions that you require. Now, like Pioneer and Integra, there have been some price changes since we originally reviewed the 2021 lineup. So, for example, we've seen that the RZ50 has actually gone down $100 in price to $1,299. The NR 7100 has actually gone up $200 to $1,299. The NR 6100 has gone down $100. And the 5100 also down $100. So 3 models have gone effectively down $100, and 1 model's effectively gone up $200. And I say effectively, in some cases you'll see that they've raised the base price, but then they put it on sale. So they'll raise the base price $300, and then they knock $200 off of it. But we know where they started from. And you look just quickly at the Pioneer line, these all kind of line up at the same price points. There's some variation in that, but you can find equivalents except for that entry-level model from Onkyo. There's no equivalent in Pioneer, or as we're seeing here, the Integra lineup. Now looking inside and comparing the TX-RZ70 to the old model from 2016, there's significant difference with the boards and the power supply and the heat sinks and the amplifier modules. It looks like a completely different unit from the inside. So while they didn't change anything outside, it'd be hard for me to find something that hasn't changed inside the unit. What really stands out here is that big Onkyo power supply in the center, the HDMI board there with 2 fans sitting on top of it. It will be interesting to know if there's any noise you can hear from those fans as they operate. Or are they quiet? Or how often do they really even come on? If they don't come on, they're only there for emergencies, it's probably not a big deal. So that's the difference between the Onkyo, similar story with Pioneer. That LX904 is much different than what was released a few weeks ago, at least announced a few weeks ago with the LX805, and then similarly with the Onkyo, the changes there resulting in the DRX-8.4. And look at all these side by side. The power supply, it's got that same center layout, but each model has the respective brand on it. It's hard to say if there's anything different under the hood of that cover for the power supply. But we can clearly see that the heat sinks are different. Yes, Integra and Pioneer seem to share this kind of heat sink where the fins are out at an angle. But Onkyo's come out straight, perpendicular to the board. It don't look as robust as what you see in Integra and Pioneer. So it's not just the fact that they're coming out perpendicular. Otherwise, that top board there with the fans, that looks identical. Now let's get into how the speaker layouts are between these. And we'll look at the Onkyo lineup first here. And the new model, the RZ70. This supports a 7.2.4, and it's a true independent subwoofer, and that's why it's in green. 7 ear-level speakers, 2 subwoofers independently controllable, and 4 height channels are supported. So it has 11 amplifiers on board, so we can color this all orange because this unit can cover this whole setup without any external amplifiers, less than what you have in your subwoofers as self-powered subwoofers. If we look at the discontinued 3100, that's actually the same support. 11 amplifiers supporting 7.2.4. But if we go one down on the active portfolio to the TX-RZ70, what we notice here is we don't have independent subwoofers. That's why the 2 is in purple. So it will take that one subwoofer output and put the same signal to both subwoofer as indicated in the manual. And then you have less amplifiers. You only have 9 channels of amplification in the RZ50, meaning that if you're going to do this full 7.2.4, those rear surrounds will have to be powered by external amplification. Now you're moving down to the 7100, you have 2 less channels of processing. And that makes it so that you are limited to a 5.2.4 or a 7.2.2 configuration. And those .2s obviously are wired in parallel. You'll have to make a choice between that second height channels pair and rear surrounds. What are you going to put in there? When you move to the 6100, you lose yet another 2 channels. And now you're down to 5.2.2 and 7.2.0 configurations. Now it's a choice between the first row of heights and the rear surrounds, and no support for a second row of heights. And the 5100 has that same configuration support. Now when it comes to surround formats, they all support Dolby Atmos and DTS:X with the RZ70. And this is what we've seen with the other 2 flagships. They're now making Aural 3D available. On a side note here, these 3 models, the one from Onkyo, Integra, and Pioneer, their new flagships, are really the first products I've seen that have introduced Aural 3D as new support since Aural 3D themselves went bankrupt and then were subsequently purchased and are now called New Aural. So it's good to see that that option remains and we're seeing new product that's coming out with support for Aural 3D. But no indication that they're adding it to the other models. And this is colored blue temporarily because we won't see it actually in the product until a firmware update June of this year. Well, that's only a couple of months away. So it'll be green pretty soon here. So the next thing we'll look at here is the headphone support. There's a 1/4-inch headphone jack, which is under those doors available. They all have that support. They have AM/FM radio. They have a removable IEC power cord, and their power is available at different voltages, but you have to select it when you order because that's determined at the factory. 110 versus 220 is not settable from your house. Looking quickly at the Pioneer and Integra models, we can see the similar support for like models. So there's nothing new to add here other than just calling attention that the Pioneer Integra flagships support, other than that the Pioneer Integra flagship models have 150 watts versus 140. Otherwise, support is exactly the same for this page. Now, looking at some of the other formats, IMAX Enhanced, we see this on all the models except for the entry-level models, Dolby Vision across the board, and calibration. Now, with Onkyo, their own developed calibration is called Accu EQ. Now, this is also available in the Integra models. With Pioneer, they have their own calibration tool called MCACC. I suspect it's exactly the same as the Accu EQ. If you know it differently, let me know, but there's nothing that tells me it's any different other than what it's called. But the great thing that all these brands have done, Pioneer, Onkyo, and Integra, when it comes to support, is they've added in Dirac Live. And they've done this at no cost. This is built in with the unit. You get that license. Unlike Denon Marantz, with their approach is, while they're giving you Odyssey by default, they are charging you for Dirac Live. Now, I might suspect that one of the reasons why Marantz has to pay for it is Odyssey is a third-party company. They're already paying a license to include, versus Accu EQ, in the case of Onkyo and Pioneer and Integra, the technology, I understand, is owned by them, so they don't have to pay a license, so it doesn't cost them anything to put Accu EQ into these receivers. They only have to get the license for Dirac. So that could be the difference there. The other thing that they're doing, this is different than the other models launched in 2021, is they're making available bass control for Dirac Live. It is a paid upgrade, so if you want single sub, that will come in at $350, multi-sub at $500. All but the entry-level model are Thx Certified. Now, the 3100 was certified as Select. Now, it seems like THX has changed their nomenclature for certifications. I think they're all just called Certified now. I'd like to dig into this further, but they're using different names nevertheless. And so all these new models are just THX Certified. They're not, don't seem to be differentiating between them. So until I know more, I'm just going to color them blue. And if I don't know if Select 2 versus Certified, one's better than the other. I don't know. It's they made it complicated again. And if we look at Pioneer and Integra, it's the same story, albeit Pioneer doesn't do any THX certification, but we see it on Integra for the 5.4 and the 8.4. I want to talk about Clips Optimized mode. Onkyo has it. Integra has it. Pioneer doesn't. And I find this quite odd because Pioneer is priced higher than Onkyo and has a few other features that Onkyo doesn't. But why aren't they doing the same thing for crossovers as they do for Onkyo and Integra? It kind of baffles me. And I've looked at the website and I've looked into manuals. So for Pioneer, there's no mention of the Clips Optimize mode. What is this all about? Because of the new relationship with the parent, Vox International, and also owning Clips, they've decided to put profiles in for certain Clips speakers. So this is their reference and reference Premier speakers. So it will seamlessly integrate. So they've put in known optimized crossover settings that are automatically applied when you have those models of speakers. And we've seen this with updates to the firmware to Onkyo and Integra, that they're adding in new models of support for those speakers as they develop in those profiles. So that's good to see, but why isn't it on the Pioneer? And we got some screenshots of what you see, and it's called speaker combo when you actually get into the product, not clips optimized mode, so don't look for that in the manual or in the product, but speaker combo it's called. And with the Onkyo Integra, you have a choice of the clips mode or normal mode. In normal mode, you can go in and independently set crossovers, and most you have to do this if you don't have clip speakers. You definitely have to do the manual, and having it independently adjustable on each speaker is really good. Now, one of the community members chimed in and said, hey John, the Pioneer doesn't let you do independent control. And that is true up until this latest model from Pioneer. So the 805 appears now allows for independent control of each speaker, can have a different setting and not just a combo setting. And while some of the previous models that were introduced in 2021 didn't mention the combo mode in the literature, we can go and look at the release notes for the firmware and see that the September 9 release of the firmware for Onkyo and Integra added in compatible speakers for clips optimized mode and added reference Premiere series. And the March 30th release supported speakers for more speakers for clips optimized mode. And we can see with the March 30th release, they added in more speakers. As far as the DACs, Onkyo, Integra, and Pioneer are really only talking about what these flagships have, and the flagships have an ESS chip in it. It's an ES9026 Pro. They use two 8-channel chips to cover these channels. The chip itself is decent. Now the output is really what we care about, and with the RZ70 you get 107 dBs of output at 0.0% THD. It supports PCM output of 24192, even though the chip itself is capable of more. But we get the full DSD support, and we love the fact that they're keeping the DSD support in here. DSD 256, and that's available across all the lines. So these output specs are pretty consistent. What we'll notice is that the lower models are only 106 dBs single to noise. And this is essentially the same story we see with Pioneer and Integra. Let's take a look at the I/O now. This new model has 6 HDMI inputs and 3 outputs, as opposed to 7 in and 2 out with the 3100. Now the 3100 was only had support for 4K, so we can see why they may have decreased it to 6. And they may have also felt that more customers could benefit from 3 outputs, although I don't really have that need myself. If you have needs for more than 2 outputs on video, let me know. I'm curious about the applications that are out there. As far as digital outputs, as far as digital inputs, there's 2 coax and 2 Toslink. But that drops down to 1 and 1 when you go to the RZ50 and below. There are no balanced inputs or outputs with any of these Onkyo models. There is pre-outs, multi-channel outputs for 11.2. The RZ70, as we said, is the only model that is independent subwoofer. The rest is in parallel. And starting with the 7100, it's only the subwoofer outputs. There's no pre-outputs. You have to use the amplifiers built in for the most part there. Give you a couple of zone outputs. 6100 on down is only 1 zone. There are 2 composite and 1 component. video input on this model. That's the same as in the RZ50. None of the other models have composite and component video. So if you need that legacy support, you're moving up to the higher models in the chain. But Onkyo is one of the few brands, along with Pioneer and Integra, that support these at all nowadays. There's support also for a moving magnet cartridge-driven phonograph. And we can quickly see the Pioneer Integra and showing on their flagship models having the balanced input and some other things. And I think this shows it best. If we look at the back of the Integra, Integra has 4 features that we do not see on the Onkyo model. The balanced input, balanced front subs, balanced outputs for the front channels and the subwoofer. So that's front, right, left, and center, and 2 subs on balance. Pioneer drops the front channels and only has balanced subwoofer outputs. They also have this unique thing where they've got a parallel for the first subwoofer outputs. They give you 2 outputs for the subwoofer output 1 and 2 outputs for subwoofer output 2. The idea is to have front subwoofers and rear subwoofers, and those are controlled independently front to rear, but not left to right. And having subwoofer outputs for your zones, your second and third zones, is unique to Integra. You don't get that even on the Pioneer. But none of these features on this slide are available for Onkyo. Let's look at the video a little deeper. So as we said, the channel counts as what we had before, 6 in, 3 out for the RZ70. Those are all 8K. Except for one of the outputs, that third video output is only going to give you 4K, and that's for a zone output. So I think that's fine, that you get 2 8K outputs and 1 zone that's dedicated to 4K. The 8K is done at 40 gigabits per second on all these models. We're still encountering that quick media switching is not checked off for these new models, but it was listed for the RZ50 in 7100. This could very well just be a marketing mistake of not including it, but it's not in the manual either, and those are usually reviewed by the technical resources. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but you have VRR, you have QFT and ALLM and DSC available, but just not QMS. So curious about that. On HDR, you've got all the formats, hybrid log gamma, HDR10 plus, you have Dolby Vision, IMAX Enhance, and the copy protection is 2.3 version. So pretty comprehensive there. These are things you wouldn't have had with the older 3100 because it was on the old HDMI standard. And just quickly looking at Pioneer Integra, we can see that's pretty much the same story for equivalent models. Nothing interesting there. And as far as networking, all 10100, wireless is going to give you Wi-Fi, ABG, AC, that's great. Bluetooth is both in and out, so bidirectional on the Bluetooth. They've done this since 2021. The older models didn't have Bluetooth out. And when they do this for Bluetooth out, you're actually doing it at a higher quality. They're doing aptX and aptX HD out to headphones and speakers. But bringing it in for, let's say, your phone or your tablet, it's SBC, which is low quality, and AAC, which is what you typically see on an iPhone. And then same story with Pioneer and Integra. For control, very consistent story, and this carries through to the other brands, Alexa, Google support, Josh.io support. It gives you only 1 infrared input, wired input. They do have, and this is up through the 7100 model on these protocol controls, as well as the DB9 serial connection. The 6100 and the 5100 isn't going to give you any of these integration connections. And of course, one trigger output. One's a little stingy. I'm actually using 4 on the back of my Emotiva RMC1 because I have a lot of external amps. But if you only have one external amp, that should be adequate. And the only integration they advertise is Control 4. Integra is really for their integration market. They also list Crestron. I suspect they're probably all the same, but they position Integra as being the integration box. So they'll advertise more there. They also give you more infrared inputs. They give you 2 inputs on Integra and Pioneer, and they give you 2 triggers on the Pioneer and 3 triggers on the Integra. More trigger outputs as you move up their brand hierarchy. Streaming ecosystems, AirPlay 2, Chromecast, Sonos. Roon is coming to this new model June of this year with that Aural 3D update. This is already present in all the other models. DTS Playfire is already there. Flare Connect, we don't see that advertised anymore with Onkyo brands, so I think they've abandoned that one. And we can see it's the same story with Pioneer and Integra. Internet streaming, so you can connect to services like Amazon Prime Music, Apple Music, Deezer, Pandora, Spotify, Tidal, but not with MQA, and Tuned In Radio. And this is the same story for Pioneer and Integra, no changes there. Remotes. These are all the Onkyo remotes. Instead of having a blue or an orange power button, it's yellow on the Onkyo. And that's how you know you have an Onkyo remote. Otherwise, they look the same. Now, the RZ70 has a new remote. As we said earlier, it's different than what was in the 3100. And quickly looking at Pioneer and Integra remotes, you can see what we're talking about is it's the same remote, just with a little different color button on there. The only difference, the 3100 remote doesn't match up with the discontinued models from the other companies, but other than that. As far as the physical dimensions, we don't see any real big changes here. The RZ70 is about the same size as the 3100. It's the same height, 7.9 inches, 202 millimeters. A little deeper though, 18.9 inches, 480 millimeters. And the width is the same. Weight-wise, though, it has gained weight. The 3100 was 43 pounds, 19.5 kilograms, versus the new RZ70 is 48.5 pounds, 22 kilograms. So some of those changes they've done internally with new power supplies and heat sinks and other boards have added a lot of weight. The power consumption comes in at 1,095 watts, 0.1 watt on standby. Not quite sure why the 3100 is so low, but they may have been using the D3 amps, so Class D amps, so it was using less power when run. So that is a possibility, but I question the way they posted the power consumption versus the other. It's still a 11 channel, 140 watt per channel unit. All of these are built in Malaysia as it was on the prior models with a 3-year warranty. And we can just quickly see here Pioneer and Integra were all kind of comparable. Just looking at from a weight perspective, the Onkyo weighs somewhere in between the Pioneer and the Integra. Again, you'd think that the Pioneer would be the second heaviest and the Onkyo weighing the least, but those are actually reversed. And you'd think this because Pioneer is priced higher, price per pound. But it's actually, I do suspect that they feel that the Pioneer brand can command a higher price. Looking at the displays, all these have on-screen displays. From what I could tell, they're all the same other than a logo. So looking at the manuals, I don't see much difference between the Onkyo and the other brands. Dirac Live is what you would expect here for its interfaces. These are some grabs from the manual, but it runs on externally. It's not running on the unit itself. There is a mobile app, and this was images I got from the Apple Store on the Onkyo version. It's pretty much the same app, just again skinned for Onkyo with its own icon. Now, Integra has another mobile app that came out this year with an update, and it's called Control Pro. I don't believe the Control Pro or something similar to it is available for either Onkyo or Pioneer. So we'll just stay tuned, but as of right now, there isn't. So that is our first look, overview at the new Onkyo RZ70 model. What do you think? First of all, are you even interested in this family of brands, Onkyo, Integra, Pioneer? And if you are, where are you sitting in this? Is there a preferred brand versus another? I have a lot of people writing in and said, yeah, despite these flagship, still the RZ50 is the model for me. Is that consistent? Are you feeling the same way? That feedback would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And if you want to take the involvement here to the next level and help out this channel, consider going to our Patreon channel at www.patreon.com/Ripewave. And as always, you can hit that thanks button and do a one-time donation. That would be really helpful to keep us going here and bring in more products for evaluation. And then finally, you can hit that bell notification so you will be informed when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.